Welcome to this video that explores briefly how digital games can drive powerful learning. And we'll look critically at this throughout the course, what it can do and how to make it happen and what it can't do. And what are some of the problems? So Plass and colleagues in 2015 talked about the magic circle. And there are three things that work together that seem to make games so engaging and support that learning. And in the center of these three things are more detailed things that we will explore in some detail later in the course. So it's a continuous loop: challenge, response, and feedback. So let's look at each of those elements. So the challenge component is that problem, that task that gets people ready to explore. And it can be a sandbox where you just go explore, or it could be a problem you're trying to save the princess. So most games start with this challenge. And it often starts with where the player's skill level is. There are game mechanics. There are, how do you get from here to there? All of those choices that are available in the game that make up the challenge. We will also, when we're thinking challenge, I'm thinking flow. I'm making connections to learning. So, Csikszentmihalyi talks about flow, and that's balance between challenge and skill level. And it's when you get it right, you get this deep immersion in intense learning, a tense experience. And we can tie this also in with Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, the ZPD, and that sweet part, a spot of challenge where the task is either too easy or too difficult, and it's that optimal learning and engagement zone. So you'll notice there's a few citations here. The links are in the notes in the slide deck, which will be available in Canvas. The second part of this magic circle is the response, or the action. The player is doing something. They're not just sitting there. They're learning things because they're doing things. So, Quinn talks about learning as action and reflection. Through the responses, the students are testing ideas in a safe environment. They're applying knowledge to solve problems, thinking critically, building muscle memory, and that can be important as games get more complicated. I am really bad at Twitch games because I never grew up with them and haven't been motivated enough to learn them afterwards. Also, the next stage is at feedback. We know how important feedback is for learning. Reinforcement if you're doing it well, tweaking if you're not quite doing it right. So in games, in digital games, that feedback's immediate, it's adaptive and progressive. I recently read an article about if the feedback is embedded into the game, then it's much more effective than if it pops up and the student has to read something or learn something. The player has to stop and read something. Also with feedback, it reinforces successes, misconceptions, all of those things I mentioned earlier. So in the center of the circle, we have all these elements that work together to build challenge, to support responses and give feedback. So we have incentive systems. Those are the points, the badges, the leaderboards that can keep motivation high for some learners. We've got the game mechanics that make the play possible. We have to think about how learning is going to happen if we're looking at these a digital-based game for learning. So we have to really understand learning. And then we have all these aesthetic values, the visual design, the narrative elements, the musical score that create that immersion experience that keeps people wanting to play. And those aesthetic elements may support context and support transfer because of that. And all these elements work in a continuous loop that builds skills, confidence, and engagement. So a change in difficulty as you go along, meaningful reward structures. You have to know your audience to know what's meaningful for them. And that narrative integration, the context can really support learning. And we'll look more about the importance of context in learning and digital-based games and simulations later on in the course. You want to make sure the magic happens, and we'll come back to this. So make sure we're not prioritizing entertainment over learning. It's a balance between entertainment and learning, engagement and learning at times. We don't want a system that's overly complex, so the cognitive load interferes with learning. We don't just want intrinsic rewards. We want to motivate the player to keep on playing for as many reasons as we can. Intrinsic if we can, curiosity, meaningful choices, and not, if we don't integrate a gamification into a larger learning environment, the students may not see that connection. I saw it once when I was teaching in the Faculty of Business, where students were playing a business simulation, and it was a game, they got points, but they weren't cluing into how it connected with what they did in class. So we have to think about that, and we'll do that as we go along. Here's a few hints on implementing it into that larger picture. Being clear about why the students are playing it, why the learners are playing it, how to introduce and connect the game to what else is happening in class. In the game, we saw this. How does that compare to this? Think about it when we're designing games, which is the second half of the course. We'll talk about that later. And just to summarize, this magic circle framework, it's creating that safe place where learners can take risks and keep on playing. And that challenge response feedback loop drives learning continuously, that time on task. And we need to balance all those elements, and you're going to be analyzing games. You're going to learn about games now with this framework by playing those games.